Thanks, Neil, and thanks, everybody. I'm excited today to be joined on stage by David Echegoyen from Acumen Brands out in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Well, thanks, David, for joining us.
Happy to be here.
I think you just got in about 20 minutes ago, right?
I did.
So saved by the bell.
Yeah.
We also noticed that David's sporting some of Country Outfitter's own brand boots today.
Yes.
Right. So if you haven't checked those out, you should definitely go ahead and do
great.
that. Well, David's joining us on stage today to talk about the idea of customer insights and how these have really evolved over the course of the past decade plus. I say that because prior to joining the team at Acumen Brands, David actually had a very deep background at Saatchi & Saatchi. So comes to us with a pretty interesting perspective from more of the brand building approach to marketing, and has done a lot around building out a team laser focused on customer insights down in Arkansas. And I've had the privilege of spending a lot of time down there with David's teams over the years, and I think one of the things that has really struck me on all of those visits has been this intensity around the metrics. And when I was down there last summer, someone politely invited me to join one of your weekly marketing meetings, and I think what was really unique about this was it was someone from all parts of the organization that was there. You had merchandising, you had the brand managers, you had acquisition, all focused around sort of a single view of your business and your metrics. So would love for you to talk a little bit more about that, specifically what insights mean at Acumen and how that's evolved.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to do marketing without data nowadays, so most of you guys here have access to a certain depth or level of data. I think the biggest change or the biggest transformation we went through is about 4 years ago, we were looking at data purely to transact. Like, data was our number one way of understanding what we used to call it a better mousetrap. So how do you make a better mousetrap with better data, right? And that led to a continual, never-ending slicing optimization that never yielded a long-term relationship with the customer. It just yielded more transactions. And so what we realized is that data is much more powerful if you focus it towards building relationships than if you focus it towards building transactions. And so our company moved from this idea of we're going to use all the data we have to create more transactions, make our investors happier, and make more money on the bottom, because that created a vicious cycle of acquiring that we couldn't necessarily sustain. So acquisition and transactions became closely related, and we said, let's move on from that to truly have relationship with our customers. And I think by the time Cassie was coming over, we were really trying to repurpose the tools we had to build relationships, and that's why sell-through was such a great tool for us to come in contact with.
And talk to us a little bit. I think one of the challenges we see out there is that there can be organizational silos that make that practice much easier said than done.
Yeah.
So what did you guys look like a couple of years ago? What do you look like by today, and how did that change, and how was that oriented around data?
Yeah. When we were transactional, the biggest department inside of marketing was pay-per-click. So we ended up calling performance marketing, and that was literally it. Like, those guys ran the show. They ran the budget. They ran how much we were going to spend, how much we were going to make. That team was probably 8 or 9 people, and it's 1 currently. And you saw a much bigger influence from merchandising, email team. That's half of it here. Kept on growing. Like, we started investing into folks that we felt would bring more of that relationship mindset. The business in general looked different. I'm not expecting you guys to know what Acumen Brands is or was, but Acumen Brands was basically a company dedicated to trying to see where there was a lot of demand and low supply on the internet, and we create a site because there was enough demand and low supply, and that sounded like a great business idea. We convinced investors 3 rounds to do it, so we went off and did it. And the idea was, if there's a lot of demand for art supplies and we can sell them cheaper than somebody else, let's create an art supply site, and then a baseball bat site, and then a something else site, and then a medical scrub site, and we ended up like 14 sites. And again, the focus of it was all, forget about the insights, it's all about more transactions. So we made some pretty sizable decisions based on insights to focus the company, around relationships.
Mm-hmm. And you made an interesting comment to me when we were catching up earlier when you were reflecting back on your days at the agency, and you made a statement along the lines of things have almost come full circle and how people are thinking about insights. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I don't know how many people from the agency world are here, so I had to say some things. But you know, the agency world lives in this strategic planning idea of understanding behavior. And the more you understand the motivators behind behavior, the more you understand how to influence behavior. And so it was kind of on paper, it looked incredible. But as an agency, we never had access to enough data to truly, of course we did focus groups, of course we did in-home interviews, and of course we did all kinds of ethnographic studies. But we really didn't have behavioral data. We didn't really understand what people do. And this is coming full circle because we don't have to ask people what they think. We can just observe what people do. And that creates a lot more cues to what they will do in the future, which creates for us a lot more of a better education on how we should be servicing the relationship. You know, but going back to my earlier point, I think the company moved from being a we can do anything that has demand online to focusing on specific industries. And then we moved to understanding what our customers wanted. That's why I'm wearing boots that we design and manufacture, because we said customer insights revealed to us that the marketplace didn't have enough offerings as it should. So we decided to, instead of having a company that only does e-commerce, we started a company then that did product design, product manufacturing, product distribution. And after that, we started a company that did media, all because we saw that consumer was underserved, and all the insights that were feeding us were, do not stay just in e-commerce, but move the company forward in a different direction.
Mm-hmm. And you know, to that end, so you mentioned how insights inform this decision to vertically integrate. You also just mentioned in passing the media business that you have all started, which is countryoutfitter.life, right?
Yeah.
Talk to us about how you're using that as a vehicle to augment the traditional e-commerce offering that you guys have had, and how you're actually measuring the efficacy of that from a metrics perspective.
Yeah. So, you know, part of my idea in the conference is to be real. So I want to be real with you guys, which is going to strip all the sexy, glamorous things that media and e-commerce do. But our content business started as a blog that was meant to sell more product, right? So we said, how do we get to a better rank with content? And so we sell all sorts of apparel and boots, and we said, if we write about red boots, we will rank for red boots, we will sell red boots. Well, lo and behold, people didn't want to read about red boots, so we really didn't have a content site. We had a content blog that was an excuse to sell more product. So we ended up hiring, and if you guys want to get into content, and you guys are currently in e-commerce, this was helpful to us. We ended up hiring somebody that had a vision for content and a voice for content that made it completely different. And they don't work for the e-commerce people, they work for themselves as content. And what that did is we saw an incredible engagement on that. So we started tracking people who read now are real stories about real things that they wanted to do, how much more likely they were to buy. Then we started looking at the engagement that they brought to the table, which was far above the engagement that people that only get product emails was. So we started mixing up our emails. And then we looked at how can we make revenue from not only selling product, but selling that audience to someone else. So today we have a media division inside the company that generates revenue from doing native advertising programs with Ram Trucks, who happens to have a close affinity to our audience on the readership. And we have a mini agency now that takes care of it. And all of that, you know, was great because we had the discipline of an e-commerce company put into a media company, but it was not really just an excuse to sell product. If you guys are approaching content as how can I rank or how can I sell more product, people are going to figure it out pretty quickly. It's like, it's boring content. I could care less what are the 9 different ways to wear that. It's like, it's not great.
Well, Neil mentioned earlier that a big focus over the course of the next 2 days is going to be on customer retention. And so obviously when we talk about customer retention, the idea of lifetime value is very, very top of mind. Mm-hmm. What impact have you seen on lifetime value as you guys have diversified the business and started doubling down in places like media?
Yeah, it's huge. So, you know, when we started this idea of we should have a relationship, we probably had 28,000 emails, I think, total. It was like cousins and friends and people we begged to put their email address. We currently have over 10 million email addresses, and what we saw when we were purely focused on transaction was such a disengagement. Like the fact that you have 10 million email addresses doesn't mean anything unless they're actually doing something. And so we realized when we brought our own product that we were bringing in product that was actually interesting. We actually used that huge email list to source what product should be. So our product designers will make the stuff I'm wearing. and then they will get prototypes. We will test it with the people that we have a relationship with. Their insights will actually tell us what to bring to market, what to sell to other retailers in what states. And then our media just gave us the ability to say, when there's nothing product to talk about, what should we be talking to you about? Because we saw a huge burn on our list and our overall engagement when all we talked about was product. People get really tired. I don't care who you are, and I don't care how much you love product. You can't see it 7 days a week. You just can't. And so we looked at how can we bring in things that are closer to what we call the center of gravity. So how could we bring things that are, and lo and behold, country people love to travel, and they love entertainment, and they like to cook. And so we started writing about all these things. So if you get our men's email today, it might have a mix of footwear, apparel, how to make great martinis, and how to drink beer like a man. I don't know. Like it'll really bring in a true mix of what is important to you and how can we bring in product into that as well.
Mm-hmm. And with that focus on customer experience, I think what we've seen anecdotally across the customer base is that one of the challenges of a focus on the long-term experience is exactly that it's a long-term play, right? It can take a little bit of a while to get the results. So from your perspective as president and CMO of the company, how do you work with your team to sort of balance the interests of lightweight, nimble A/B testing with those longer-term longitudinal studies?
Yeah, I think at the beginning we had to convince our investors that we should be putting so much into retention versus acquisition, because you get hooked on acquisition crack and you measure the cohort to make sure that you're getting that return immediately and that cohort is performing. When the long-term relationships are more complex, they are more fragile, and they require a bigger investment. And so if you're betting on the transaction, it's a lot easier. It's cheaper because you don't have to wait that long. You kind of try to turn it fast. If you're going truly after the relationship and being a customer insight centric, it's going to take a little bit longer to see it. So you're betting a little bit more on the come, but you have to do that knowing that the engagement will happen. So what we did is we started looking at it and said, all right, how do we change acquisition, and how do we look at acquisition in a way that allows us to do that in a longer term? And then depending on what we were testing, what requires 2 weeks, what requires 1 month, and what requires 6 months, and can we really hold off doing things for that long? And at the beginning it was very hard. When the transactional mindset was still there, I don't think we ever ran tests for longer than 7 days. Actually, we would run some tests for 30 hours and then call it because we were scared of the results, and we would kind of pull it. And we started focusing more and more on, 2 weeks of results were good, 1 month of this A/B testing was great. So sometimes you just really have to stick to it and make sure that you're truly learning and getting customer insights, and be okay with the math, because the payout's not always immediately visible in the first few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As you shifted that focus to be more oriented around that long-term view, how did you know that you were nearing success in that? I mean, obviously that can be a really long journey. So what were the mile markers along the way that said, hey, we're onto something and we're making a really great impact on our business?
Yeah, some of it was clearly engagement. Some of it was, what part of our list is continuing to come back. Our business is very seasonal, so part of it was engagement prior to key seasonality, because we see a lot of people coming in at the end of the year, so 40% of our business happens in Q4, so clearly you would see that engagement. And if your test was running through that time, your data's completely screwed up. So we would look at a kind of a true seasonally adjusted performance, and I think LTV was a true measure. I mean, it is a true measure. We looked at where we acquired people, how much did we pay for them, what was the relationship in between, and when did they end up transacting, and how much did they end up making.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And going back to what we spoke about earlier with some of the organizational challenges, I think one of the other things that's really unique to Acumen, but fantastic, is the tight alignment between actually your FP&A team and your marketing team.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about how you're actually taking those marketing insights and using them to set the financial strategy of the company.
Yes, part of it came from the brand building world, where you have traditional brand managers have a finance person attached to them, and they have a logistics person attached to them, and kind of distribution, marketing, operations. They all kind of function as a mini company for that brand. We had a similar idea. We could not disconnect FP&A, financial planning, from our marketing spend, because we could break the company. So literally, you can end up betting so much on the come that you will spend more than your cash flow allows you to, and even though it might look great at the beginning, the long term is not there. So I think it was getting young, smart finance people who understood what we were trying to do on the marketing side and kind of force them to be in the marketing meetings. At the beginning, they were completely black hat, and they would like turn everything off and say, don't do that, oh, you can't do that, you can't spend that much, you can't put it here. Until they started seeing results, and then they kind of started becoming part of the team. And it was honestly an education on the marketing side, which had to evolve from pure marketing strategy and looking at pictures and looking at copy and looking at things that we would traditionally consider marketing, to looking at actual finance numbers and looking at the impact it was having on our P&L. So not easy, but honestly, I think best overall for everybody involved.
That's great.
Yeah, it really was.
Yeah, and so inevitably, when you're going through this pivot of, as you described it, going from the transactions to the relationships, there's going to be a lot of surprises along the way, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of what we're going to talk about between today and tomorrow is something that can look really attractive in the near term may bring a surprise with it downstream, right?
Yep.
Or vice versa.
Yep.
Curious if you have one or two examples of some of the surprises that you guys saw along the way that were maybe a little bit non-obvious without the metrics.
Yeah, we were, when we started acquiring en masse, so we said we're going to be about relationships, which still means we had to acquire some, but it allowed us to think beyond acquiring people on search terms where there was huge interest to acquiring people on social platforms where they're just wasting their life away on the internet. They're not really looking to buy anything. We had all of those mixed. So our cohort and our channels were not perfect in terms of where were we acquiring what. So at the beginning, it looked like all of the cohorts were performing phenomenally, and we were super happy, and we were spending like drunken sailors. And then when we started breaking it apart, we started realizing what channels were actually performing well. And one of the biggest surprise was channels don't stay performing well for a long time. And so Google's and Facebook jobs are to make the most money for them, which means that they will adjust their algorithm consistently to do it. And today, that's obvious. 3 years ago, it wasn't. You knew you had a window of when you could continue to acquire and do this. But I think there was a huge surprise on how fast your dependency on a platform where you're acquiring could truly, sink.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I know you guys have a fairly diverse acquisition mix today, but going back to the point of the 36,000 names, right, when you guys were getting off the ground, social was a huge driver for you guys.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that, because I think it's a channel where different marketers have seen varying degrees of success, and it's something that you guys were able to do quite well.
Yeah, we got into social when Facebook is not as good as it is today in terms of understanding how to monetize. So I think our biggest insight, going back to customer insights, was Country Outfitter, which is the company that grew inside of Acumen tremendously, did it because we saw a need for us to pay respect to the lifestyle. Like, people had not appreciated, the market, the country as a whole had not appreciated a look that included Western boots as something that you should be proud of. And we saw that as a huge opportunity. We said, if we can inspire people and make them feel proud of how they look, regardless of if it seems cowgirl or cowboy to anybody, we will find quite a bit of acceptance with them. And that's what happened. We ended up kind of building upon that insight of they want to be proud of who they are, and they have not found an outlet to do that. And we gave them a lot, and we respected the product. We photographed cowgirls like they were going on Vogue magazine. I mean, literally, it was such a shift from how you would traditionally see the lifestyle. And social was just a great medium for us to do that. So, we went from, I think, I'm not kidding now, we went from like 100 and something fans on Facebook, which was the size of the employees we had at the time, to 6.8 million, then to 8 million, then to 9 million. It was just incredible, the kind of acceptance and reassurance people had because that insight was spot on. Yeah.
And along those lines, you talked about some of the design tactics that you guys would employ. I'll share with you guys, inevitably when we go out and speak with new prospects for sale through and we share success stories from Country Outfitter, a big question we get is, wow, they must have really ample design resources to do all of this awesome content personalization. Talk to us about how those decisions are made. I'm assuming it comes back to the broader idea of measurement in the longer run, but obviously we know that's a big ask from a marketing team, so I'm sure people in here would love some tips for how you build that business case.
Well, it started small. We had 2 designers pumping out way more than they needed to, and they didn't really have much of a life, so that was kind of we need to do something about it. But it was really looking at how big is the engaged list and how much retention can we do, because when you start doing the permutations of how many custom emails you can really send, you'll realize how many assets you really need, how many pieces of art you really need. And that's what happened to us. We started with, we will need 40 variations of that so we could send this to 400,000 people. Well, if we're going to send it to 1.5 million, we will need 120 variations of that, which means that we need another photograph of it and another copy line. And that's kind of where it started building up. And we really did hand in hand. So we would see the results come through, and then we would say, let's add another photographer, let's add another designer. So we went from having 1 full-time photographer to having 5 in about 3 years. We went to having from 2 designers to probably having 10 to 15 designers, depending on the time of the year, in about 3 years. So it took time, but it was really a version of how much more can we do to customize, and what are the assets we're going to need to do that. Yeah.
Naturally, automation has been a huge driver
really
in
has.
helping you over the finish line on that end.
Yeah.
Talk to us about, over the course of the last 3 years, how have you guys pushed the marketing program, specifically the email program, to be more focused on automation for scale?
Yeah. So the proverbial batch and blast was wonderful until it isn't. And that's the issue. It's like you never know how good it can be on the other side until you move to the other side. So we started looking at customizing. We were probably immediately before we started doing business with you guys. We had the idea of doing it. We had no idea what it was going to take. And we started with very simple stuff. We started with, okay, let's email people who have done this action, right? So it was abandoned carts was a no-brainer. If they abandon a cart, we should email them back. I think we now have tens of behavioral programs running on all sorts of different triggers. So I think, to give you guys an example of things that have worked perfectly for us, it's like when we started changing the way we email people based on behavior to based on interest. So engagement was the things that would trigger lists. So we would say, this person read an email in the last 7 days, therefore they want to see more email, let's email them again. Well, that's not necessarily true. The fact they opened 7 days ago doesn't mean that they want another email from you, but since that was engagement, we said, let's email them again. And then the people who read in the last 30 days probably deserve another email now, right, don't they? And we would email them again. We started evolving from that to saying, what are they interested in? And if we email them what they're interested in, we could email them a lot more often. That gave us a huge jump in open rates. We've gained about a 28% in the last 3 or 4 months, a 28% in engagement, just changing the way in which we're emailing people from truly just a kind of behavioral engagement-based, interest-based. Another big thing we did is we started using sight lines beyond purchase. So instead of just saying, hey, this is the potential of purchasing this product, this thing, we started looking at AOV, we started looking at all sorts of things, opt-outs, et cetera, that we could look at to email these folks. And that gave us a conversion rate bump of about 82%, which was very, very significant. So it's truly evolved from we're not doing batch and blast to having a complete team devoted to every week coming up with new things of how we could be engaging customers.
For those of you who aren't familiar, so Sightlines is the predictions product from SailThrough, and I think one interesting thing as we start thinking more about the power of predictions moving forward is customer experience is obviously most top of mind for our business, most top of mind for yours, but inevitably with the power of predictions, there are some financial gains that can be made there as well,
absolutely.
right? So you talk about like these average order values, specific offers. How do you guys think about the financial upside and where to balance where some of those wins may come from that lens versus this focus on consumer interest and the ideal customer experience?
Yeah, and I think the key there is it's not a microwave. It takes time. It's not instant. And so sometimes you think, well, I just applied this. I should see the results tomorrow. Well, customers don't work that way. But you see the results, a few weeks into it. So we started looking at if we're going to have a sale, and most of the items in the sale are over $200, and we send that to people interested in sale, just because they're interested in seeing what's on sale, it was a lot less effective than saying, we're going to have something on sale that's $99 and below, and we should email it only to the people on sightlines that have an interest on $100 and less items, even though they have an interest in sale as a whole. So I think as you start dicing it even further is when the financial gains start happening. And what I would say is it's micro ideas or micro versions of batch and blast. And so you can not do batch and blast as a big list, but you can do batch and blast on your many things instead of realizing that you can continue to slice that up and do it in a more personalized way.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think we still see, inevitably, segmentation still works, right? And when you talk about this micro approach to batch and blast, I think it's more traditional segmentation.
Yes.
But what we're seeing is with each additional thing that you layer on, whether that be behavioral data, interest data, predictions, the returns are just that much greater.
They are that much better, and you see it in every way. They open more, they're engaged more, they buy more. It's absolutely clear, and it's been a huge tool for us. It really has. Yeah.
So you guys are sitting on a treasure trove of data. I know you're pulling it in from tons of different systems. How do you push your teams to avoid the so-called analysis paralysis?
We probably had it plenty at the beginning, and that was the realization of you can know so much, but getting to a point where you're actually acting on it was much harder. And so we started dividing up the data into what is important to the email team, what is important to the performance marketing team, what's important to the folks doing the design. We kind of had to do a data allocation instead of everybody has access to everything all at the same time, which is absolutely, I mean, there's nothing that you good out of having all the data at the same time. You really won't have any action coming from it. Yeah.
And what is the cadence of communication? I mentioned before when I came down there, I sat in a great cross-functional meeting, but inevitably if there's a limited lens of what's there, as we talk about the importance of things like leveraging the retention data to optimize the acquisition program, how do you ensure that happens?
Yeah, so we have a meeting, a standing meeting every morning at 9 a.m., and every different group related to marketing presents back to everybody else. So the email team, I think, presents on Thursdays. The merchandising team presents on Wednesdays. The performance team presents on Mondays. So they all kind of share what they feel is most relevant out of that marketing cycle so that we have a continuous customer experience, a continuous set of data. So kind of the key learnings go out in and out of the organization literally every morning at 9 in the morning.
That's great. And I remember from being there, I think it was in your office where you had some dashboards up literally all day hitting the F5 button.
Those are very addictive.
Yes, very good to see.
They were running there all the time.
So you made a great point about how it's great to have all of this data, but it's more important that you're actually taking action on it. How do you, what's the governance that you guys exercise internally to making sure that you're doing that? Obviously, you're a very heavily testing-centric company, but as you continue to iterate, as you continue to evolve, how do you make sure that's happening across the various departments?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest pieces is getting everybody to read data from the same place. And so, we had, for a time there, so much pieces of data. We had Google Analytics, then we had stuff coming out of NetSuite, stuff coming out of Demandware, stuff coming out of Sell-Through. And whatever group it was, they tried to prove their point with the data that most benefited them. And so the first governance was, let's all look at the data from the same platform. Don't bring Google Analytics, and that's the only thing you say, and that's the piece that you bring in. So we had to kind of agree. We all look at the same platform, and we all kind of derive data from it. The second one was, what are the milestones that we're achieving? So a lot of it is understanding what projects are going to deliver what, and how fast can we get through them. So we have a kind of pretty tight deliverable because we have that weekly 9 a.m. meetings, weekly for each of the teams. We get to see the progress week on week. So if the email team's presenting every Thursday, whatever we talk about that Thursday and that data that got shared, if it's not put into action by the next week, it's kind of a public, acknowledgement of what did you do? What did you do with that data? So we kind of have a time frame of the data is good for this time, and you're going to do something with it. If you haven't, we kind of need to move on.
Sure.
Yeah.
So sitting on all these insights, having had a lot of initial success on tweaking different things, introducing new business lines, as you look forward to 2016, what's next for you guys? What are you really excited about by way of marketing optimization?
I'm excited about the amount of insight we drive from the media side. Understanding what people consume on the media side is very insightful on the product side. We see our media side continuing to be kind of the driver in terms of understanding preference and relationships. I'm excited about what we can continue to do with sightlines and that predictability. I think our ability to understand how people will behave in the future is absolutely critical, so continuing to leverage that. And I think the last one is we are in a world where everything has moved mobile and it's moving to who knows what from here. And so understanding how to truly engage folks and not interrupt folks is part of the goal. I think the closer the device becomes to us, so the phone is probably our most intimate device, and then it's probably going to be our watch or whatever the case might be. How do you use it not to interrupt, but to complement the experience you're wanting them to have? But we're excited about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned mobile, because we've had a lot of conversations about it internally, and we feel like everyone's very excited to talk about mobile, right?
Yeah.
But maybe some of the actions or optimizations that have surrounded it have lagged a little bit. Why do you think that is?
I think at the beginning we were just trying, and this is from our perspective, we were just trying to see it as, again, another way to transact, which was clearly wrong. It was not the way we should have seen it. And then we, as retailers, you try to see it as, how can I get my information? That's my information. How can we get our information out there to them using that medium instead of what would they like to be consuming in that medium? And so, it was a conversation, for example, we had with our media folks to say, when you guys do video for mobile, don't do it like you're on TV. These people are holding their phones, 3 inches from their faces. They don't need an announcer. It doesn't need to see like they're watching CNN. It needs to be like Vice, which is, it's journalism that you're a part of. And so I think there was a mindset shift to understand the relationship that we have with the device in order to say, okay, how can I serve you through that device versus how can I transact you on that device?
So is it fair to assume, similar to what you guys did with content and other parts of the business, that you will be closely tracking the cohorts of the mobile users to look at that long-term impact?
We have. The beauty of mobile is that the engagement is great. And we can see that both on the media side and the e-commerce side. The question now is, how do we continue to improve on the experience to derive a better financial value from it? But yes, mobile cohorts to us are critical.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of marketers in the room today from both commerce, media companies, as well as some other verticals out there as well too. I think you've seen a lot as you guys have run through your testing programs, as you've evolved into content beyond just commerce. If you had to give advice to folks in the room, so the 3 things that they should be focused on, Lee, we're going to put you on the spot for a second.
No, it's great.
Where should their brains be focused coming into 2016, and how to really think about elevating the marketing program to the next level?
One of the things I said earlier, if you guys are going to do content and commerce, they really can't be serving one or the other. So I'd say keep those 2 worlds connected, but not reporting into the same commerce place, or you will end up, plaguing one or the other. So I'd say those 2 kind of, and I think it's critical. I think you need to. Second thing I'd say is get closer to the center of gravity of your customer. Understand what really it is that you can own with your customer that goes beyond product. Product at the end of the day is just the realization of that relationship, that transaction, but get close to understanding what's really the thing that makes them tick. And I think we missed that for the longest time. We looked at the world through a product lens and just thought they like to buy this, therefore show them more of that, instead of saying this is who they are, therefore we should be talking to them about this or that. I think the last thing is we all have limited budgets, so deciding where you invest is not always super clear. And we've had to learn that over the years. We at the beginning thought all of our money should go to acquisition, period, because without acquisition at the top of the funnel, the rest doesn't matter. And kind of this is full circle to where I started. We just wanted to make a better mousetrap so we could acquire more and put more people through the funnel. We have completely evolved the way in which we invest our marketing dollars into deciding how to retain better, how to invest in our customer base. So I'd say think 3 times, not twice, about how you're deploying your marketing dollars and make sure you're not being so heavy at the top of the funnel. It's kind of what we usually do.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us
Happy to
today.
do it.
David's going to be doing another Fireside Sans Fire, chat
Yes.
tomorrow, and has several folks from his team down at Acumen Brands here today as well. They're a great group. I'm sure they would be happy to speak with folks who are interested in learning more about some of their programs as well.
Absolutely.
So thank you again.
We clearly don't have it all figured out. I'd love to learn from you guys and for our team to be able to learn, so I'm looking forward to conversations.
Great.
Great,
Thanks so
thank
much.
you.